The next thing that I came across having to do with artwork is an article that says, "That's not Jesus. LDS artists team up to challenge the image of white Jesus." And if you go to the next slide, this is the article. I'll just paraphrase. There's going to be an art exhibit at the Writ and Vision. This is in Provo. It's going to start on February 2nd. And the question is, why paint Jesus as a man with dark skin? Because odds are that's how he looked. Plus, it's what he would do. So they definitely want to focus on depictions of Jesus chosen based on their emphasis on cultural expression and historical accuracy, is what they say on their website. So if we go to the next slide, which I think is, this was on social media, on Twitter. I don't know, did we figure out if we could play it?
Yeah, let me just talk for 10 seconds.
Yeah, that's fine. So just the whole concept of the idea of what does Jesus look like? What is Jesus to you? Now, I had a family member back a couple years ago when they were doing recreations of what Jesus might have actually looked like, trying to dispel this white Viking Jesus that we have. And so you probably saw this. It was in Time magazine. They came up with this, dark skin, dark hair, very accurate, I would think, to what Jesus probably looks like. I took it to this much older family member and I showed it to them, and they covered their eyes and they said, "That's not my Jesus. That's not my Jesus," because it's not their Jesus. It's not the one they grew up. It's not the one that when they pray, they're thinking of. So I guess you could say, like the song, "It's my personal Jesus." But I thought this was interesting. If you go to the beginning, this was a Harlem meeting house. Supposedly someone's taking a tour, looking through a room, and they come across in Harlem. Here is the picture, their depiction of Jesus right there. So again, like my relative said, that's not my Jesus. And I guess there's nothing wrong with picturing Jesus in the image in which you're most comfortable. And of course, you could take that to the extreme, what some people might consider the extreme. I don't know. Let me see. Do I have one more slide? Go to the next one. Oh, yeah. And then I started thinking about, there's this weird thing going on in Mormonism with smiling Jesus. I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but he is absolutely hysterical. Look at some of these pictures. And I wonder if it has something to do with the chosen, maybe trying to portray somebody as more accessible, when in the past he's been more ethereal and now he's accessible. The other trend I see, the picture in the middle, is just super handsome romance novel Jesus, right? These are the kind of pictures that are hanging in a lot of faithful households. So I don't know. What are you guys' opinions about making Jesus more accessible, making Jesus more what means something to you personally? And also, what's up with smiling Jesus? RFM.
I think the laughing Jesuses are symbolic of the fact that Jesus is now watching Mormonism live.
That's got to be it. Your number one driver.
He's listening to your Shakespeare stuff.
Why would he be laughing at that?
Because it's so brilliant. It makes you happy at your existence.
Let's brush up your Shakespeare. But anyway, no, and we have to remember that the very first time laughing Jesus was done, which has been some decades ago, it was considered blasphemous by many people. But now that blasphemy is becoming more mainstream.
Exactly.
So it's not so blasphemous anymore. And we think about a Jesus as smiling, a Jesus is laughing, as not being something that's blasphemous, but something that shows another aspect of the character, which we attribute to him. Yeah. What did the first line of that article mean anyway? If Jesus painted a picture of himself, it would be as a dark-skinned Jesus. Is that what it was saying?
I wasn't sure once I read it. It didn't make much sense, but you're right. I think they just were making a joke, not a joke, but an observation, WWJD, because he's loving and inclusive. He would encourage anybody to imagine him in a way that would mean something to them personally and make them comfortable. I think that's how.
Yeah, maybe. I'm not a mind reader when it comes to Jesus, but I will say that I think that people create God in their own image. And I think there's a reason for that. And I think that it's largely probably a positive thing.
I think
so they identify with their deity.
Yeah, I think there's been times, though, especially in the LDS church, where you could not do that. I mean, I remember going to Fifth Sunday meetings about 15 years ago where they said, don't even use the word Jesus. It has to be very serious, very sacred. Use Savior, Jesus Christ. I mean, talk about keeping somebody at arm's length. You were really not encouraged to have this idea of smiling, heaven forbid, a smiling Jesus. But I think the trend is a little different now with something like The Chosen, where you see Jesus as a common person and more accessible. What do you think, Bill?
I have to follow up before Bill or John speak, because I think that as I think about it more, positive things, but also negative things. When Jesus is your own ethnicity, I mean, he's got to be some ethnicity.
Yes.
If he's yours, there's positive, relationship, but there's also the possibility, very real, of excluding others who don't belong to the same ethnicity as Jesus, who happens to belong to yours.
Like Viking Jesus that we've had forever. Viking Jesus, blonde, blue-eyed, Viking Jesus. Yes, Bill.
Do you? Well, two things. One is that obviously we have no clue what the Savior looks like. We even have prophets in the Restoration who disagree on the Savior's eye color. So we don't have a clear-cut picture even when we're led by prophets who talk to him on a regular basis. But I think it's almost probably impossible to get to a point where on the average sacrament, on the average chapel wall is a picture of a Jesus who's darker skinned with bristly hair, which would almost certainly be the case, because I think, especially in Mormonism, we've barely got to the point where our artwork isn't all white people in the depiction. Like when the Savior's coming out of the sky for the second coming, it's all white angels. Any LDS art piece that shows the pre-earth life, it's all white people. Mormonism has barely gotten to the moment where it will allow Christ to be surrounded by multiple ethnicities of people. And so I think we are probably still 40, 50, 60 years away from making any kind of nudge on allowing an average picture to be a darker skinned Jesus.
I agree. And think about it. There are only, 17 approved pieces of artwork that can go into any meeting house or church space? It's a very limited list. There are certain pictures that you can display. You can't display one of those smiling Jesuses. That is for sure.
What's going on in Harlem then?
Well, and that's what I'm afraid of, that we possibly outed that meeting house. However, I will say that was on Twitter. I don't know if it's completely accurate, but it was all over social media. So I don't know what's going on in Harlem.
I would dare the brethren to remove that picture and see what happens.
At this point, I would love to see that. Absolutely. And it is ironic, given that many of the members of church, the majority, are outside of the United States. And probably, it's a different scenario. John, any thoughts on smiling Jesus of an ethnic origin?
I mean, honestly, I'll just say kind of the obvious. The Pew Foundation's report on the rise of the nuns shows that in the United States, people are just fleeing religion en masse, not just Mormonism, but pretty much all mainstream Christian sects. And I think it's largely due to the fact that with the internet, with social media, with just popular media, with younger and younger generations, guilt and shame, those dogs don't hunt. And I think just younger and younger generations aren't buying the patriarchy. They're not buying the control. They're not buying the heavy-handedness and the guilt and the shame. And so your Jesus needs to reflect your business model, really. And you need stern, suffering, angry, vengeful, Jesus or God, if your doctrine is emphasizing those traits. But if you're getting nicer and kinder and friendlier and less guilt-ridden, then you need a Jesus that reflects that. And I think that's what we're seeing.
Yep, I think you're right. I like romance novel Jesus. I would maybe even hang that picture in my house, possibly. I don't know.
Fabio Jesus?
Yeah.
You want Fabio Jesus? I love it.